There we go. Okay, so please go to the book of Mark, chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. 30 through 44. And we're not going to do a lot of different Bible verses today. We're mostly going to stay here, and we'll just go to a couple other places just to stay more. Gotta move around a little bit. Can't stay at one place in the Bible. Okay, so Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. Very familiar story. And if somebody could read that, I'd appreciate it.
I can read it. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that we can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and they can buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Do I keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
Okay.
It's a lot of folks.
It's a lot of people. 5,000. Okay, so
huge loaves of bread.
So once again, this is a story that we're really familiar with, the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to actually cover a lot of the details of this story today, because what we're going to do is we're going to look at this and say, this is how Jesus is teaching us to help people. That not just us as individuals, but especially us as a church, us working with other people who have the same thing. And we know that Jesus is telling us to do it, because he says right there, you give them something to eat. That's right there in the middle of the story. He's talking to his disciples, to all of his disciples. He says, you do this, and then they give excuses, and then he does it. Okay, so we know that this is supposed to be passed on to us. Jesus is looking at us and saying, here's this situation. What are you going to do about it? But look, I'm giving you an example. I'm telling you how to do it. I'm giving you the steps to do it. You just need to go out and do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the steps. We're going to go through this passage and look at the steps that Jesus says. How do we help other people? When we see a situation, even a situation that may be too big for us, we're going to look at what Jesus says as far as steps, how to help other people, whether it be one person or be a lot of people. 4,000 people is a lot of people. 5,000 people. Sorry, 5,000 people is a lot of people too. That's about the same number, maybe a little less, than are on the streets of Portland. So, you know.
That's just the men.
Well, yeah, we can talk about just to bring up. A lot of times, people say the men, and the men mean it means that there's still women and children beside that. First of all, there probably weren't too many women and children. This is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to a remote place.
Where the pigs were run off the side of the cliff?
No, that was a different spot. That was a different place. That was Decapolis. This is still in Galilee, but still it's a remote place. So it's not a place that you're going to pick up your kids and go to. There may be some kids there, and John said that there was a boy there. There was a boy, we don't know how old, but But there weren't too many kids, probably not very many women. But even so, the real thing is when it says that there were 5,000 men there, a lot of times men is used as generic for people. So we don't actually know, is it 5,000? Is it 6,000? Did they actually count 5,000 heads?
Yeah,
Probably
right.
not. They're estimating.
Well,
Okay.
it does say they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties.
They did, that's true. So
So they
they
probably
may
counted
have had a good idea of how many people were actually there.
Wow.
Yeah,
I had
but I would say that it's closer to 5,000 than some say guesses 10,000.
Oh, yeah.
There's some people who say, well, see, it's got to be twice as many because no, it's probably closer to 5,000. Could be 6,000, could be, but probably not much more than that. Okay, so first of all, so let's get some principles that Jesus is saying. First of all, Jesus is paying attention to the community. It says Jesus is telling his disciples right at the beginning, I have compassion for them. I have compassion for them. He's recognizing, hey, look, all these people went all the way over here, and it's the end of the day, and for sure they're hungry because there's no way that they brought enough food with them for them to eat that night. And so he's saying, we need to do something about this. We need to do something about this. Now, here's the other thing that's very interesting. So the whole point, especially in the book of Mark, it's a little different in Matthew. That you have the disciples, they've just gone out. They've gone out as homeless people from town to town and had to deal with demons and had to deal with healing, had to deal with people who didn't like them being there, and some, they got thrown out of some towns and had to go to another town where they might have been accepted. And so they've been doing this for who knows how long. And they all came back and Jesus says, you know what? You guys worked really hard. You guys have done a great job. Thank you so much. Let's go and get some rest. And then all these people show up. And Jesus says, well, sorry guys, rest is over. No rest. We're gonna come back and we're gonna do this. And Jesus is so compassionate to the people that he's even willing to break his own Sabbath that he established. And that is not recommended, but sometimes it has to happen. You know, not recommended. Okay.
Certainly not for work.
I've been texting. My daughter's going.
Okay. Anyway, so you feel he felt the compassion. So that's the first step every time, is to see what the need is and to feel it. He looked at them and said, hey, these people are like sheep without a shepherd. I see their need. I want to say something about really quick about the phrase sheep without a shepherd. So shepherd in the Old Testament is always used for any kind of leader. So sometimes God is the shepherd, like in Psalm 23. Sometimes elders, like in the Sanhedrin or village elders, are the shepherd in the Old Testament. Sometimes the king is the shepherd. That's used a lot, actually, in the Old Testament, where a king is a shepherd. Any kind of leader is a shepherd. And Jesus is saying, here are all these masses of people, and they have no one to tell them the truth. No one to tell them how to live. No one to give them, nobody to help them in any way. And he says, well, they don't have anybody, so I guess I'll be that person. That's really amazing. That's really really amazing, especially when you think Jesus is the guy who they said, hey, we're going to make you king, and he says no, and he runs away. You know? And so, but here he is, he sees the people, they're sheep without a shepherd. These are a bunch of people without a leader. And he says, so that's how come he taught them. Because he's saying, you guys are people who have been living without law, without rules. Let me give you some principles to live by. And then later on in the day, he says he feels compassion for the same people because they've been sitting listening to him so long. They're so desperate for that. And they want to hear it so badly that it's way past dinner time. And then he says, man, these guys need to eat. Let's figure out something for them to eat. So so Jesus is just showing again and again, this is the kind of heart that we ought to have As disciples of Jesus, we ought to have this kind of heart. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, giving the community or giving the people a responsibility to take care of themselves isn't good enough. Jesus, or the disciples said, hey, just send them away. Send them somewhere else so that way they can eat. Please let them go.
There are
so they can
villages
eat.
nearby. It said that there are villages and towns.
Yeah. He said, yeah, they're like, send them off to other places. Clearly, they're saying, it's their responsibility. They can take care of themselves. And Jesus says, no, we're taking responsibility for it. A lot of times, and a lot of times this depends on God's call, okay? And so there are times where we can say, well, I've got to set boundaries here and I can't do that. I can't help everybody all the time. But then there's other times where we definitely feel a call of God. And God is saying, no, I want you to step out and I want you to help these people. So that's where Jesus and the disciples are. Well, specifically, that's where the disciples are. Because Jesus, God, is telling them, no, you're going to give them something to eat. That's what's going to happen here. And so they're just like, oh, man, this is what we're doing. So the thing is that when we hear God's call, we need to respond to that. I heard somebody say, have you guys ever heard of a guy named Karl Barth? Sometimes called Karl Barth. He's a very famous theologian, and he loved Karl Barth was a guy who really liked to write a lot. He wrote a 4-volume thing. Each volume is that thick on the will of God. Wow. Anyway, you like to go on. Very famous theologian. Anyway, so somebody sat down and said, so Karl, please explain to me what it is that we're supposed to do. What it is that we're supposed to do. How are we supposed to act? How are we supposed to do what is right? And he goes, okay. Half hour later, this guy is still sitting there listening. Just kidding. Karl, in my church, we have a principle, and the principle is we do what God says. That's it. and Karl said, no. Anyway, sometimes it's just that simple. It's just God tells us what to do. He tells us in our heart, and we do it. And that's it. And that's certainly what is going on here. Now, there are different principles. I will say that there's a lot of times that there's a difference between God speaking to our hearts and, let's say, us speaking to our hearts, or something else, this big, enormous thing of rules speaking to our hearts. Oh, well, there are these rules, and I have to follow these rules, and so I really need, no. The difference is that God is always going to lead us to do something that is going to encourage to love. God is love. So if God tells you to do something judgmental or condemning, it wasn't God. If God is telling you to do something, do something that is going to completely overwhelm you and mean so that way you're going to do it wrong, that wasn't God. That was you saying, oh, I want to do this, okay? Or I feel like I need to do this, or I have a responsibility to do this, And so we got to make sure that we're hearing from God and not from somebody else. And that just takes practice. It does. It takes practice and it takes mistakes. And that's as much as I'm going to say about that today. Okay, so next thing. So the thing is that then the disciples say, oh, you're telling us to do that? Well, Jesus, we have got $1,000 that we can go out and pay for the food for everybody and then give them something to eat. No, we don't have that. And so what they're doing is they're saying, well, we don't have the resources. But you notice that they're saying it very sarcastically. Jesus is saying, here, you feed these 5,000 people. And they're saying back, really? We're supposed to go and collect a year's salary and use it for just one meal? Really? That's what you expect us to do? Very sarcastic. And But the thing is that Jesus doesn't take that as a real argument at all. He just dismisses that. He's like, the resources aren't the issue. Here's the thing that we need to remember, is that if God tells us to do something, he will provide the resources. If God tells us to do something, he will provide the resources. If God didn't tell us to do something, more likely than not, we will not get the resources to do it. But when God tells us to do something, you notice what Jesus is doing. He's stepping out with inadequate resources and expecting that God's going to follow through. And so Jesus is just like, oh, we're nope, this is what we need to do. And you may think that we don't have enough resources, but somehow God is going to provide it. We have to figure out how. How is God going to provide these resources? Now, it's interesting that what Jesus did in order to figure out the resources is Jesus went back to the Bible. So first thing he does is he says, okay, so I've got to figure out how we're going to get the resources for this. And so let's see if we can figure this out, if God has done anything like this in the past. So where are we? We're out in the middle of nowhere. And what have we got? We've got a huge horde of people, and they're all hungry. There's no food anywhere. Okay. And so he looks in the past. He says, well, what other situation is there where maybe there was a bunch of people like out in the wilderness, and there was a lot of people, and people were coming and they were complaining about how they didn't have any food. Was there any situation like that? Oh, sure enough, there was. Way back in Exodus chapter 17. That's right there. We've got the manna in the wilderness. What did God do? God provided manna. He just, bread appeared and people were able to eat. He says, but in this case, Jesus said that's not specific enough. Well, what else? What other circumstances are there? And Jesus remembered a story from 2 Kings. And now we're going deep Bible. But Jesus knew his Bible really well, so he could do this, you know. So in 2 Kings chapter 4, there is a passage. And we'll see if this sounds familiar. So 2 Kings chapter 4, starting at verse 42. A man came from Baal Shalish, bringing the man of God. The man of God in this case is Elisha. We talked about him last week. Bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread baked from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. And Elisha said, give it to the people to eat. And he says, how can I set this before 100 men? And Elisha answered, give it to the people to eat, because the Lord says they will eat and have some left over. And he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? It sounds just like the passage that we just read. Jesus remembered this story and said, well, what we need to do then, according to Scripture, because we saw that God worked in that circumstance in which they took the loaves that they had, they distributed it to them, and then everybody was able to eat, and there'd be food left over. And so Jesus says, well, we're going to take that as a model for this circumstance. We're going to take this as a principle for this circumstance. So Jesus said to everyone, to his disciples, what have we got? Tell me, what have we got? And they found 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, that's what we got. That's what it'll do. And so and then Jesus did the next thing. So now he knows he's got enough resources to do the work of God according to what God has already done in the past. He knows that God fed the people in the wilderness, and he knows that God fed that through Elijah, God fed the men who had a limited number of loaves. Okay, so then he says, okay, now I know how we're going to work this. So now Jesus says, okay, it's time to organize. That's when he puts them in groups.
But it doesn't say that They just end up, it just says it abbreviates it into they're in groups of 50 or 100.
Mm-hmm.
But how did they get into groups of 50 or 100?
Well, obviously,
Yeah.
I had to tell them. just to
There's
provide.
so there's different passages. So this is actually one of those unique passages that are in all four gospels. You got the feeding of the 5,000 in all four gospels.
Okay, does it say that Jesus actually divided it down?
It does say that in a different gospel, not in Mark.
That's okay, but it says so in a different gospel?
Yes, that's right. And so Jesus told his disciples, put them in groups. Put them in groups. And so they put them in groups of hundreds and put them in groups of 50s. So all he was doing was getting them in limited things so that way he can make sure that everyone was going to be fed, nobody will be missed. It's just providing some organization to it. So just like when we served our meals, we would put the food on the table and people could come and make sure there was enough food for everybody, but we'd put it on the table. And then if there wasn't enough food, people said, I haven't eaten, we'd make more food and we'd put it out. That was our system. We had a system. You know, in other places, they have a system where everybody comes up at the same time and they get plates. Or they get the meal from up front. And then maybe there's food left over and then they can have seconds if there's any food left over. Different places have different, but what Jesus is showing is that we do need to provide a little bit of organization to make sure that everybody eats. Later in the church, this was actually a problem. As we look in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, we find out that they would have meals, and some people would rush up, eat all the food, and leave nothing for the people later. And so there had to be some organization provided, and Paul provided some organization, just like Jesus provided some organization in this situation. We need to remember, it's not just, oh, well, God will provide. No, we actually need to work on this. We need to make sure that it's fair for everybody, that everybody gets a fair amount, you know? And so otherwise you got people taking loaves and they're sticking it in there and then maybe another group isn't going to get any. No, let's just provide some organization here so that way everybody can have some food. All right. So Jesus tells them, put them in groups. All right. And then next thing is Jesus blessed the food. Specifically, it says that he gave thanks for the food. In the ancient world, to bless the food means to thank God for the food. It was actually the same thing. You were doing the same thing. Anyway, and so he gave thanks. For the food. Before he still has 5 loaves and 2 fish. But he's thanking God for providing for everyone, even though he hasn't seen that happen. He's recognizing that he just knows this is what God is going to do, and so he's thanking God for that ahead of time. We don't always have to do that, but we definitely need to remember to thank God for the work that he's done or will do. And then he took what he had, he took the resources that he had, and then he divided among them all. So instead of saying, well, we don't have enough resources, or instead of saying, well, God is just going to provide something. No, we just use what we have, even if it's just a little, and then start working with that. So for instance, like in Onawing before, we've definitely been in the circumstances a number of times where we cooked the food that we had, and then we set it out there, and it wasn't enough. And sometimes we knew we didn't have enough ahead of time. This didn't happen so much in the later years of Onawing, but definitely early on, we had that happen a lot. And we're just like, oh my goodness, we don't have enough food. What are we going to do? Well, what we would do is we would serve what we have, and then we would pray that the Lord would bring in the rest, whatever it meant. And inevitably, what would happen is someone would just walk in and say, hey, I've got this food. You want it? Oh, yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Or something else would happen. I mean, there was that one time, that wasn't actually a circumstance where we didn't have enough food at the time, but it was the one time that we're preparing food, we're getting it ready for the service, and somebody comes in and says, hey, over around the corner over there, a truck dropped 3 packages three 50-pound packages of pork off the back of the truck. And they can't take it because it got dropped on the ground, but it's still completely fine in the package,
Vacuum sealed.
vacuum sealed. And so how about, could you guys go pick it up? Yeah, so we jumped in the car, ran over and picked it up. And then we had food for 4 meals or whatever, right
We had
there.
food. It was- Yeah, longer. It was a
Yeah.
this whole came and she came before us because we didn't know how. And so that was a lot of meat.
And it's a lot of meat. That's cool.
All I'm saying is that God provides. In the situation, God will provide. There was another time where it was one of those really rare times that we had some extra money in the account. And every time that we got, if Annalie never has extra money in the account, we know something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this time, what had happened is I was in a hurry as usual, and we had cooked the soup at home, and we were bringing it downtown, and then I'm bringing it down the stairs at the front of the house, and I trip on the stairs, fall completely face down. The soup is all over the ground.
Oh,
It was a 20-quart pot.
Full of soup, completely full.
No, 24-quart pot.
24
That
Big
must have
pot.
weighed 50 to 80 pounds.
Yeah.
That probably had something to do with why I tripped.
Yeah.
But I've done that before.
Shoelaces had something to do with it.
I don't think so.
they're not
Anyway.
tight right now.
Anyway, and so, see, that's how come I know it wasn't that, because that happens, that's all the time.
Well, those are dangerous steps up and down the steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It can be.
also-
It was rainy too.
And they
It
got-
was rainy, and
They were
that's what really
slippery.
happened.
They were slippery.
They were slippery. So I slipped, soup went everywhere. And I'm just like, no, you know,
This
I'm
just
running late
did
as it is, yeah, I know. But because we had extra money in the account, enough, I just called and ordered pizza and had it delivered to the place. And the pizza place are just looking around. Where am I supposed to deliver? And some guy comes in. There's some guy out here looking for a place to deliver pizza. Place. Okay. It was.
Usually very similar, there was no food.
So with that, June is that he got all the disciples on. Okay, all of you guys, we're going to do that. Everybody goes in groups, and then you got all of my disciples. You're all going to be involved
Passing the food
in
out.
passing the food out. I'm going to break the bread. I'm giving it to you. You're giving it to everybody else. It was not, and it's the same thing with Honor Week. Not a one-man show. We got as many people involved as who wanted to be involved, as many people involved as we could have being involved. So like you saw on 39th, we had that kitchen full. You know,
Full of people.
full of people, full of everybody was doing something.
I was staying out of that kitchen because it's so crowded.
That's right. But it was fun working in there, you know.
It was fun going there too. It was
Yeah.
a ball.
Anyway, and so these are the sorts of things that, and so when we do these things, another principle that Jesus shows us is we want to get as many people involved as we can. It's not just a one person. And I'll tell you, from an organizational standpoint, it's easier to just have one or two people who know what they're doing. A lot of times it's easier with that. People say many hands make light work. Well, many hands often make extra work.
It is true.
Chaos. They make chaos. That's what they make.
I have,
Just saying.
I have that problem even with my bags. It's like last week, I realized when I was driving down to the Delta that I had left my half and half in with the milk. And they'd put it in one of those bags and I didn't have it for my coffee. I didn't know
Yeah.
which bag it was in, so.
Yeah.
But
So you got a lot of people, you got a lot of chaos.
yeah, they do
And
crazy
somebody was
things.
happy.
Yeah, somebody got
Somebody
a whole
was
quart
really
of
happy,
half and
yeah.
half, yeah.
anyway, and that happens. But Jesus' example is we get people in. In honoring, the principle that we used is there is not a separation between the served and the servers. In other words, the people who are there to eat, we give them an opportunity to serve. And the people who are there to serve, we give them an opportunity to sit down and be one of the people who are receiving
I think
the
that's
food.
important too. If there's enough food, I always
Okay,
eat.
you never got to eat, but that's your choice.
In fairness,
That's why you always
when
stay
you're
so
cooking
skinny.
2 meals, sometimes you don't get a chance to sit down much.
Yeah. Well, and some of us also are kind of busy, who are trying to figure out the whole thing.
Right.
Even so, but
We
that's.
tried.
We tried, we did try. Anyway.
Well, I know very few people that, this is outside my faith to think, to reduplicate this with whether it be auto parts or, but I guess that they were backed into a corner and they had to feed these people, so then you have to have a faith. But I would never try anything like this unless it was my last resort. Would you?
I wish I had the faith to go there first, but I don't think I do. And I should, coming from my background.
Well, I think a lot of times, and you noticed even, like you said, Jesus in this circumstance, he was stuck. But this gets to my last point, which is the 10th point. There's 10 principles from feeding the 5,000 about how to serve others, okay? I could have done it, if I decided to be more organized, I could have done the 10 commandments of helping others, but I didn't do that. Anyway, so the last thing is that we need to remember later on how God provided before so we can do it again. Let me give you, now first of all, we know that this is not the only time that Jesus did this. He fed the 5,000, but then later on, he fed the 4,000. And sometimes people say, well, that was just the same circumstance. Well, no, why is it then repeated in 3 out of the 4 Gospels? Both instances are repeated. There's a feeding of the 5,000 and a feeding of the 4,000. There's both. In John, it's only the feeding of the 5,000. That's because he's trying to shorten things.
Question too
Yeah.
about that. Does the feeding of the 4,000, he says the thing about faith in there, doesn't he? Like he rebukes them for their lack of faith, doesn't he?
Not exactly. Let me
Okay, go ahead.
just let me finish because
Your point, yeah.
my point. So in Mark chapter 8, after the feeding of 4,000, it's after that. So he and the disciples are getting in the boat. They're going to another town, going to another place, and so he's trying to tell them something really important. He's saying now, beware, take care of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In other words, there's some bad teaching out there, and you've got to be aware of that. He used the term leaven. And the disciples said, oh my goodness, it's because we didn't bring any bread. Oh, see, he's getting on our case because we didn't bring bread. Now we're going to go hungry later and all that. And Jesus, wait. What are you talking about? You're talking about bread? Really? You're talking about bread? I want you to think for a second. How many people did we feed a few weeks ago? 5,000 people. How many baskets were left over? 12. Okay. How many people did we just feed today? 4,000 people. How many baskets were left over? 8. Don't you get it? We're supposed to remember that God is going to keep providing. And we're not going to see how God is going to provide necessarily. We're not going to see it ahead of time. But when we get into the circumstance, we don't have to fret and say, oh my goodness, now we're all going to starve. No, that's never going to happen. And we're always thinking it's going to happen. Even in the later years of honoring, I'm still thinking, well, gosh, do we have enough food? I mean, I'm like, didn't you open the refrigerator, Steve? I mean, come on, you know? And so we're not gonna have enough food, we're not gonna have enough of this, we're not gonna, we don't have this supply. No, God is gonna take care of it. It's gonna be okay. And we fret so much ahead of time, don't we? So, about whether this is gonna happen or whether this person's gonna follow through and all of that, and we do that all the time. And Jesus is just saying, stop fretting about it. Stop worrying about whether it's going to happen. Did I call you to the work? Yes. Called you to the work. Is it going to get provided for? Absolutely. Do I know how it's going to get provided for?
No.
Unfortunately, no. Wish I did.
Mm-hmm.
As a person who organized this for a lot of years, that's what I wish. I wish I knew everything ahead of time, and I worked really hard to try to do that. But a lot of times, it just doesn't happen that way.
We're not control freaks, but we're just saying, God.
Yeah, right.
We just want to know. Okay.
And I get really upset, and I show up to the building, and I've got everything all laid out, except that when I get there, I find out that some things didn't get put away, and so they're actually bad, and I have to throw them away, and now I have to figure out a new plan. And that freaks me out. And sometimes I have to, and sometimes you get there and you find out that half the food had been eaten, and you don't know how that happened, but there it is, it's gone. Now you're gonna have to figure out something else. Or you spilled the soup all over the steps. Sometimes you spill the soup all over the steps, and then you've got nothing. But God's gonna provide. God's gonna provide. We need to stop worrying about it. When God has called us to do the work, He's going to provide what it is. And when that doesn't matter whether it's a big thing or whether it's a small thing. If we see someone on the corner and God is saying, I want you to help that person, and we go, I don't have anything to help them with, God will provide. It's going to happen. We don't have to worry about it. When we're walking down the street and there's someone really upset, like God is calling us to help that person. That's a pretty big circumstance. He's still worried about it ahead of time. The Holy Spirit tell you what to do. Right, man, and we need to be fair. There is going to be some organization involved. That's part of the model that Jesus gave us, but we're still not supposed to fret.
We want to have our bullet points.
Well, I won't have my bullet points. Sometimes not just bullet points. I want them numbered and in order.
And letters for the sub-bullet points.
And letters for that's right.
Well, there's also just in our society that you're irresponsible if you don't have everything all. And so if you are just, walking in faith and feeling really good about trusting God, you're just being irresponsible. I mean, that's the way our society looks at it.
Yep.
My aunt went to a Bible school that followed this principle.
Tell them about that.
She went to a Bible school where they had a recommended tuition, which if you didn't have the money, you didn't have to pay. Nobody was allowed to go get a job off campus because they wanted you focused on your walk with God and the Bible school experience. The teachers were all volunteers, and sometimes they didn't have enough food for dinner, and they would pray it in.
Wow.
And that's what they would all sit there, and they'd be like at lunch or something. They'd be like, "Well, they'd be sitting at the cafeteria and be like, well, guys, we need to pray dinner in because we haven't got it." And they would, and it would always come. There would be something.
When I went to India, the school mission of this run the same way. Sometimes they had, and actually we had which we had to swim in and have we had keep us these places, and so.
I'm kind of in that place right now in my ministry because I don't have any funds. And so I asked the guys down there to pray that I would have funds come in so that we could buy propane and stuff this winter. And the guy that I realized is the drug dealer, he came up and gave me $30.
Okay.
And I've gotten, I had one of those Visa cards that just has a limited amount of money on it that I had bought for someone that then I never was able to give it to them. So I had that money.
Okay.
And then just today, Martha and I were going through old stuff and we had bought gift cards that was just when it was just the two of us instead of the three. So Anna said, you guys just take those. And so now I have $50 for the next week or two. So it's just, it's really great. And
Yeah.
I just, the thing is that I could spend my own money and I'm willing to, but I know if I start doing that, it's going to really bug my husband. So I'm trying really hard not to do that. And, but God's just providing. So
I call that the God savings account.
it's God's savings account.
The God
That's
savings
what it
account.
is.
That was one time we were receiving money for our rent from the denomination, the Mennonite denomination. We receive a check every month, and some months we really needed it, and other months we didn't need it so badly. And so one month we really were desperate. We're trying to find out how it is that we're going to do this, how we're going to pay. And I received an email from the denomination saying, well, we have, in our records, we noticed that you didn't cash this one check from 3 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And we're like, what? Really? And so I go and I start looking around and tearing everything apart, trying to find this check. Yeah, it's down in the bottom of the trunk of my car. There's a whole bunch of stuff on top of it. And so I find this check and I go, oh, we got our rent this month. And so that's the God savings account. Where things sneak away, you don't even know where they happen, and then it's just like,
Right.
when you need it, then you'll find it.
Yeah.
And so, anyway. All right, I can tell these stories all day. These are my favorite kind of stories.
Well, I'm going to take us back to Vancouver. And
All right.
Right.
On the night in which Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread, passed it to his disciples, and he said, take, eat, this is my body, do this in remembrance of me. Thank you for those same things. And listen, Jesus took the cup and he petals and he said, this is shed for the new covenant, for the forgiveness of sins. As we think Jesus died for us of sins, and we think it. It gives us the loves that we can see as Jesus. Compassionate act as he did. And pray the benediction. Lord. Keep thee. The Lord make thee. To shine upon thee, and just as I must be.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Mike.
You don't want to.